Hard work is a duty to yourself and to your community. It's really what gives life meaning. And so that Protestant work ethic is really driving folks to say things like, I want to work and I don't want a government handout.
We've been hearing in the news lately, there's a lot of protests going in the US, especially to have the economy opening, right? Yet in Canada, it is so much different. Pretty much all the provinces and even municipalities, leaders at every level have banded together, trusted expert opinion, and are taking a very cautious wait and see approach because they realize the stakes are pretty high, right? If they rush it, things can be even more disastrous. So even though Canadians and Americans are so tied to the hip in so many ways, we are so different yet, right? Maybe can we talk a little bit about why this difference? I think also it is important that we call out that not all protests are rational, right? Talking about protesting because they're at home going crazy, need a haircut, things like that.
Yeah.
Those are not necessarily rational, right? And we can understand a lot of it is driven by conspiracy theorists spreading disinformation, and also through political gaslighting. So taking that apart, there are also people who just want to go work because they cannot support their family, they cannot support themselves, right? There are genuine people who are having issues supporting themselves. So let's take the rational portion of the population and then try to rationalize their mindset and understand what's the difference between US and Canada.
Yeah, so I think this boils down really to the culture and the mindset of Canadians versus Americans, right? Because if you think about the origin stories of these two countries, people have very different views on how America came about versus how Canada came about. So let's talk about three kind of distinctive American stories or myths, whatever we want to call them. The first is kind of the Wild West frontier myth. Right. So there's this idea that back in the days when the West was still, quote unquote, untamed, that American heroes would go out into the Wild West. They would build out settlements. They would help develop towns, and they would help basically bring civilization to the West. And the conditions there were harsh, but the American hero kind of pushed through that and continued to build out the country with just their hard work, right? And so that's one thing. Like, despite really dangerous, really harsh conditions, the American Wild West frontier myth just is really enduring in Middle America. And a second thing is the Protestant work ethic. Most immigrants that were coming into America, the original 13 colonies, they were Christian, they were Protestants that came over. And part of that Protestant work ethic, the story behind that is many Protestant denominations feel like hard work is a duty to yourself and to your community. It's really what gives life meaning. And so that Protestant work ethic is really driving folks to say things like, I want to work and I don't want a government handout, because you've taken away what gives their life meaning. You've taken away what gives them dignity, and that's really difficult to accept from a psychological standpoint, right? And finally, we can talk a little bit about how the American origin story, the independence story, kind of shaped the attitude that Americans have towards government, right? So I think we all know at a high level, the American colonies were taxed by the Brits without representation, and then ultimately the Americans decided that they would fight back. That led to the original Boston Tea Party, and it ultimately led to independence from Great Britain. And really, this is it's embedded in their Constitution too, right? The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. It's really because they want to protect the American people the rights of the American people to protect their own individual rights and freedoms against a government that's encroaching on their rights, on their freedoms, on their property. So that's why Americans have more of a general distrust of government. Whereas if you look at the Canadian origin story, we signed an agreement with the Brits. We signed a charter with even though we were already independent, we signed our constitution with Queen Elizabeth. It was a negotiation. So we have a much more collaborative type of relationship with our government, and we tend to trust government officials more north of the border. And I think that's some of what is playing out when you've been talking about things like Canadian politicians banding together and giving united messages, because they have the confidence that Canadians are going to listen to their government in a crisis like this. Whereas on the other hand, the American politicians, again, they know that there's a sharp divide between their various supporting bases, and so they're continuing to leverage these myths and these work ethics to continue to drive their agenda forward, which is how do I, if I believe my performance is measured by the growth of the economy, obviously shutting down the economy doesn't do anything for the growth of the economy, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
how do I leverage these mindsets to reopen the economy and to grow that economy, right?
Yeah, especially when a leader of a country says that it's time to enforce your Second Amendment, which is kind of enforcing their belief that especially the third point that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And something going in our favor is we have a much better safety net program in terms of social security, as well as from a universal healthcare standpoint, right? So that also kind of builds more trust in the government, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That would be magnify the effect of what's of the mindset that's already existing, right? So another way to frame it is Canada was only able to put that system in place, the $2,000 a month CERB in place, because we already trust the government.
Great points, Eugene. I also want to bring up this point, which is the other end of the spectrum. There was in the news that there are a lot of small businesses who got approved of that small business loan, the loan forgiveness, and they are trying to start up their business back on. But people, especially people who are being paid minimum wages, didn't want to work. They're upset at their employers because if they had laid off, they could have essentially made more money through unemployment than through actually working. So there are different viewpoints, so as to speak, and some of it may be because of how the economic system has been in the US for so long. Minimum wages, lack of social security net, things like that might have contributed to it. But there are different viewpoints in a country like the US, which is more and more polarizing these days.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to see moving forward, right? So you'll continue to have a group of people continue to carry on those mindsets and will be, by definition, just louder, right? Because they're the ones who are willing to go out and do those protests and shout in front of the TV cameras and make a show of it. And I think those will dominate the headlines. But like you said, at the end of the day, if there's hope at the end of the tunnel, it's that some of these economic policies might be able to get people to think about what's better for them economically and from a safety standpoint, and then make the right decisions for themselves to actually keep themselves safe, right?
Yeah.